Yes.
I call to order this meeting of the King George County Board of Supervisors.
And I call to order this meeting of the King George County Planning Commission. For the record, we do have a quorum on our side, and I believe you all do too.
Yes, sir.
I'll ask at this time if you can please stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance with us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Granger, would you lead us in words of invocation, please?
Lord, we just come before you and thank you for this opportunity to meet with multiple bodies of this county, Lord, as we come together to discuss the business of this county, Lord. We thank you for the staff, everyone that's come out to see you, that you can be with us this evening, and for the wisdom, guidance, help us to make good decisions in the crafting of our ordinances, wise decisions that will help develop business and protect the citizens of the county, Lord. So be with us and actions to the Lord in your name. Thank you, Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right. So, joint meeting, obviously joint work session meeting. I believe we've got amendments to the agenda, Ms. Hull. Are they spelled out? Okay. All right. So, first item for business then will be public comment period. At this time, if there's anybody in the audience who would like to come forth and speak and address the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission, please do so. And would ask that you lead your, limit your comments to 3 minutes. State your name and address as you begin your comments. And at this point, we will open the public comment period for anybody that would like to come.
Debbie Fairfax, 623 Kings Highway. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Board and Planning Commission. There is, near Great Oak subdivision in Prince William, more than one quiet data center. One by QTS, as the HOA president of Great Oak told me, has had no complaints against it. There are also, bordering a different part of that same subdivision, data centers that are still causing true significant noise problems for residents today and all through tonight. The nearest house to them is over 600 feet away with a 350-foot treed buffer. I've shared stories of other locations where data center noise has been a huge problem. Even magazines published for the data center industry itself call out noise as an issue that must be dealt with if data center developers want to build near homes. In Prince William, the Board of Supervisors paid $11,000 for a noise study. Amazon has acknowledged the noise problem and is meeting with the HOA president biweekly. Amazon is to begin a 1-year process in February to hopefully address the issue. Meanwhile, Amazon wants to build a data center in Warrenton. Amazon has promised to meet Warrenton's strict noise ordinance. The applicant will be required to submit a noise study at time of site plan admission, and if the data center is allowed, another noise study 1 month after beginning use is required. And there are additional requirements. As residents, we're asking you to require any data center that comes into King George to be quiet. Therefore, please adopt Warrenton's noise ordinance with both DBA and DBZ ratings. Please require a noise study by a third party verifying that a data center will meet strict noise standards. That is now going to be required in Prince William as well. Second, there are numerous reasons why round-the-clock uses such as data centers, battery storage facilities, and utility-scale solar should be by special exception, at least for now. These are new uses in the county with known issues. Permitting these by special exception only allows the county to maintain much greater control over location, rate of expansion, resolution of unforeseen issues with corporations, the diversification of our industrial revenue stream, and ensuring the best practices for our county and our residents. Please place these uses in special exception in the current ordinance and in the new ordinance. Thank you for your commitment and diligence. You've been placed here in leadership for such a time as this. Please fulfill these reasonable requests for the benefit of today's citizens and those in the future. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't mean to have my back. Oh, you got somebody else. Okay. Just checking.
Todd Fairfax, 623 Kings Highway. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, I'd like to begin by making something very clear regarding my position on property rights. I believe that property owners should be allowed to enjoy the use of their property, but when a property owner's use infringes on another abutting or neighboring property owner, that's when a property owner's use needs to be controlled or limited so that other property owners can enjoy their property also. Isn't that part of why we have zoning ordinances? My requests are simple. First, I ask the board to take up a motion for a text amendment to the industrial district regulations in the current zoning ordinance, moving battery energy storage facility, data centers, and solar farm from uses by right to uses only by special exception. Second, I ask the board to take up a motion for a text amendment to section 1.9.3, specific definitions of the current zoning ordinance, amending the definition of data center to a single building rather than the currently ambiguous word facility. Next, I ask the board to take up a motion for a text amendment to section 1.9.3, specific definitions of the current zoning ordinance, adding the definition of data center campus as more than one data center on a parcel, and include data center campus in uses permitted only by special exception in industrial district regulations. This will add clarity to any application for data centers or data center campuses so that the county and the public will understand whether a single or multiple buildings are being planned. And finally, I ask the board to take up a motion to adopt the performance standards for all non-residential uses found in Article 9, Section 14.2, and Tables 9-1 and 9-2 of the Town of Warrenton, Virginia zoning ordinance as the noise performance standards for data centers and data center campuses in the current zoning ordinance. Thank you for your attention and action on this matter.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is David Savage. My address is 1105 Navasota Street, Austin, Texas, 78702. I'm here with a company called Open Road Renewable. We're interested in pursuing opportunities in the county, both in battery energy storage as well as utility scale solar, and have been following the developments with the new draft ordinance. I see from the agenda this evening that there's likely to be or at least there'll be a vote on a change order for further work on the draft ordinance on both of those provisions. So I'll keep my comments brief and we'll remain engaged on both those subjects as the county proceeds. We have submitted written comments on the utility scale solar ordinance as it is drafted now, and we plan to do the same for the battery energy storage facility draft ordinance. But just at a high level on both of those, and speaking from our experience in the state, we've been working in Virginia for about 7 years and have developed both of these kinds of facilities in other counties. We again like to pursue those same opportunities here in King George County. On the battery energy storage facility draft ordinance, really only two high-level comments. One is that the ordinance would incorporate by reference National Fire Protection Association Standard 855, and we applaud that completely. We are not working directly on the standard as it has been adopted and as it's reviewed constantly, but we work with a number of industry experts that do that, and it's certainly the gold standard for safety for battery energy storage facilities. And so we're pleased to see that. The one caution that we would ask the county to consider as it proceeds to finalize the ordinance is to be careful whether parts of the ordinance may overlap with subject matter that's in NFPS 855, inadvertently either causing a conflict or perhaps a regulation that the county didn't intend. We think that adoption of the gold standard as it will evolve over time will best protect the county and will certainly allow us to know what our targets are for development. The second comment on the battery energy storage facilities is that the standard as it written now says they should be invisible or not visible. We would ask that be made into a standard that's more achievable, like well screened, or it's enhanced, the appearance improved. On utility scale solar facilities, Most of the ordinance, we are in complete agreement with. There are 7 or 9 new studies that would be required under the new ordinance, not required in the existing one. We submit them routinely on our other projects and applaud the county for doing that. What we would ask is that the county consider not including so many locational and size restrictions, because the county's really got already tremendous restrictions on utility scale solar because of its topography and because of the limited transmission capacity. I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners and supervisors. My name is Blake Cox. I'm with a nonprofit called Energy Rights. I'm a Chesterfield resident, not from King George here. So one of the founders of a nonprofit called Energy Right, and I founded Energy Right to encourage and educate around energy being developed the right way on the local level, with a focus on property rights and conservative ideals, including an all of the above approach to energy. So on behalf of Energy Right, I would just like to thank you for your diligent work on your proposed solar ordinance, so landowners may soon bring forward solar projects for your consideration. The proposed solar ordinance incorporates reasonable setbacks from property lines, thorough decommissioning requirements, required community meetings, and vegetative buffering to shield projects from view, all hallmarks of good policy. So while this proposed ordinance does a lot of things right, I do have a couple suggested edits to the proposed ordinance that I would like to call to your attention. So first, I would say placing a blanket restriction on the distance between projects will strip the property rights of neighbors who happen to live near a permitted project. So by including a 2-mile buffer area between projects, you risk spreading projects out across the county in a random way. There may well be one corner of the county where best projects are sited with nearby transmission, existing vegetative screening, and few nearby neighbors. Density restrictions can be arbitrary and hurt those who they're really designed to protect. Similarly, acreage caps on projects and limitations on the portion of parcel coverage only handicaps the county's ability to shape reasonable proposals to best fit the site in your community. So never has a farmer been required to keep a certain percentage of his land outside of production. Never has a landowner been limited in the amount of land she can utilize for a specific purpose. Lastly here, but I wouldn't say definitely not lastly important, our rivers and other natural resources should definitely be at the top of our mind when we're trying to mitigate parts of solar projects. But a 2-mile restriction from waterways is a requirement, I think, in search of a problem. The DEQ already requires projects to control for effects of water runoff quality and quantity. Solar projects are required to engineer systems so watersheds are not affected by the construction or operation. But again here, just want to thank you guys for your diligent work on this proposed ordinance. We would just encourage you to move forward in the consideration of solar developments that make sense for your county. We'd be happy to be a resource at any time moving forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right. We don't see anybody else. Tell me if we do. We'll defer to Mr. Dines. Do we have anybody online who'd like to speak?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right. At that point, we will close the public comment period of tonight's meeting and move on to number 5, the presentation by the Berkeley Group.
All right. So thank you for having me tonight. Good to be back with you all, and to have both bodies here together. This is great. Yeah, I was worried about that. So for the record, I am Rebecca Cobb with the Berkeley Group, and we will be good. I got it now. There we go. So tonight, what I'd like to start out doing is start out by talking a little bit, reminding ourselves about the project intent, the process that we have done to date, and then I'm going to go through just kind of highlighting some of the drafted changes. We won't get into big discussion of that tonight. There's lots of time. I know that some of you probably were staying up late and busy reading through this, but we do have some additional time for review, so we're not going to get into major details and discussion on particular items of that tonight. And I'll have some kind of review tips for those of you who maybe have not gone through the whole thing yet, or for anybody else who wants to continue to review. We're going to talk about some of the outstanding items, some remaining items for the ordinance. We're going to talk about the change order and then get into next steps. And I imagine based on the decision from the change order, that's going to dictate those next steps. So project intent. This project we kicked off in 2021, and at that time, the intent was you wanted an ordinance to comply with the Code of Virginia. You wanted to clarify language where things are difficult to understand or administer. You needed clarity there. You wanted to address modern zoning and subdivision issues, and you wanted to consider zoning flexibility. This would allow for easier amendment and actually less frequent amendment. And then revise for compatibility with the comprehensive plan. You had recently updated your comprehensive plan, and so the zoning ordinance is a tool that helps bring that comp plan to fruition. And so that's part of this project as well. And then adding graphics. The graphics, again, help explain and clarify some of the language. So in terms of where we are currently, we have progressed through the first phase, which was an investigation and public engagement phase. We have now drafted all of the content, save for a couple of items that we will discuss later tonight. And then we're getting close to jumping into that last phase for adoption, where we will have a public open house so the public can give feedback on the full draft. Then we would come before you all in joint work sessions to discuss what the public feedback is, hear your feedback from your reviews, and fine tune and tweak the ordinance, and then move into public hearing phase after that. So a little bit more on the process itself that we have done. When we kicked off that community input back in October 2021, we had a survey that was open for the full month of October. We also had stakeholder interviews, inviting select people who have regularly worked with the ordinance to those stakeholder interviews. We had 4 sessions. And then we also had 2 public workshops in October. After that, we began drafting with the Planning Commission. Planning Commission has held 7 work sessions with us where we presented articles to them. We drafted the material. They provided us with edits and comments. We incorporated those, and then we would come back to the Planning Commission with new articles following that. So that has been complete at this point. We have a complete draft, and now we're moving into this public review where the public can review, provide their comments. As I mentioned before, we would have 2 joint work sessions where we can discuss what the public has said, as well as anything that you have noted for change within the ordinance, get those things incorporated, and then move into the adoption phase. So in terms of the ordinance that you have in front of you, 3 main things that we try to do throughout our drafting process. The first being making sure that it is in compliance with Virginia code. So anything dictated by code is within your ordinance. Optional provisions we've considered and discussed as well. And then the general reorganization. So making sure that it's simple and easy to follow. It's in a nice structure for everyone to use and administer. And then also, keeping in mind what we heard during the public engagement and also what we've heard from staff. And so we incorporated all those things as we were drafting, would be presenting to the Planning Commission, who would then edit, and we would incorporate those items. So I'm just going to go quickly through some of the highlights You also, in your packet, attachment A is a summary memo. The first portion of that memo contains a little bit about what I just went through, and then the second portion of that memo contains highlights from the ordinance. It highlights the major changes. It is not all inclusive, but it's a way so that you can see that, review that, and it might, cue you to particular portions that you want to give extra review to. Tonight, I'm just going to go through a few of those things that, might pique your interest, that you can note, yep, I want to do some additional review of this. But again, take a look at that memo, and there's other things there as well. So Articles 1, 2, and 3 are the administrative content for the ordinance. Some changes here are the zoning administrator is given authority to interpret the zoning district boundaries. And then if there's any questions about that interpretation, there can be appeal to the BZA. Addressing applications prior to the ordinance effective date. So once this becomes effective, if there's any applications that haven't been completely straightened out or solved yet, we address how that works. The Planning Commission can hear exceptions to the Highway Corridor Overlay District. We've added optional criminal penalties after civil penalties. So, if civil penalties are not working, it's not being effective, there is the option there to seek criminal. And then in terms of submitting applications for map amendments and special exceptions, we are saying that this would be concept plans instead of site plans. This allows the applicant a little more freedom and not as much investment right off the bat if they're going to be told no, but it gives you all enough information to make decisions and know what the request is about. And then for site plans, they would be approved administratively, but we've added some additional detail there in terms of what is required within the site plans. And then we've also split that into major and minor site plans. So Articles 4 and 5, this is your district content. We have renamed districts. We've added height maximums. We've added provisions for steep slope development. And as we saw on a tour when we went around, that's definitely something to consider in your locality. We've increased the R3 density from 8 dwelling units to 12 dwelling units. We've decreased the C2 district front setback. We've provided standards for the RC district. This was more kind of wide open, conceptual, and so we've created standards for that now. We've added minimum setbacks for cluster development. So this would be from the entire development, not just from lot to lot, but the development itself to other properties. We've added a requirement for 12 inches of freeboard in the floodplain overlay. So this just gives a little additional height to ensure structures are not flooded. This also helps landowners with flood insurance rates. And then we drafted a new military overlay, and we will discuss the military overlay a little bit later. So Articles 6 and 7, this is all about the uses allowed in King George. We have included a use matrix that includes all of the uses, and it shows what districts they are allowed in, whether it's by right or special exception, and what districts it's not allowed. In terms of the uses, we have consolidated some of those terms, we've modernized terms, and added new uses as well. And then we've also added additional standards to address impacts. You heard in public comment about addressing impacts, and so that's one thing that we talked about a lot with the Planning Commission with various uses, as well as with staff to address any impacts from uses. Article 8 is the design standard. So this is signs, lighting, landscaping. those types of things. We've consolidated those standards. Currently, it's spread about the ordinance a bit. That's one of the things we heard from community engagement is people who submit applications were, having a difficulty going through the multiple sections to find the landscaping and parking and different things like that. So consolidated that here to make that a bit easier for everyone. We've added lighting standards for development, new tree measurement and preservation standards, and then also new transitional buffer standards between districts or between uses that differ from one another. So if it is a commercial use next to a residential use, there are buffer requirements. If it's a particular business that's different from a different business, residential versus commercial, those types of things. Again, there's buffer standards required. We've increased opportunity for shared parking and added bicycle parking requirements. We've also added new prohibited signs, so kind of tightening down on the signs a little bit, revised the sign size limits as well. Then the last 3 articles is nonconformities, subdivisions, and the definitions. In terms of nonconformities, this is very state code related. There's not a lot of wiggle room for the community, but one of the things that the community can set is how much interior remodel for nonconforming structures, and we are allowing full interior remodel. For subdivision regulations, those are now located in the zoning ordinance, so everything is in one place. We've increased the length of time to own land for family subdivisions. So currently you have some standards about how long the property has to be held. Those are proposed with an increase. State code allows increase, and so we are doing that here. We've added fire protection standards for subdivisions, and we have, in terms of the definitions, we've updated those to match the uses, making sure every use is defined, and then added additional terms as well to help with the interpretation and understanding the ordinance. So some ordinance review tips. So it's a big document. I think some of you have some notebooks in front of you in the printed version. So it's a big one and it's pretty hefty to go through. And I don't suggest jumping in and going page by page. You'll probably just end up taking a long nap. So I think some things that can help with you as you review it is using that summary memo that we've provided as attachment A. And so that can help you see where things are. It can help you go, oh, they made a change here. Let me go to this article and read what this change is all about and see if I agree, see if it makes sense. So you can do that. There's also the editor's notes at the bottom of the draft. So as you're reading, we've put in some little footnotes there that will explain this is your existing text, it's not a change, or this comes from your existing text and it provides a section number and then says, but we have modified it a little bit. So then that will help you go to your existing text and make some comparisons, as well as it lets you know some of the planning commission's direction when we were having our meetings. Some of those are outlined in the editor's notes as well. And then I would say, just remember that all of these articles work together as a whole. So you can't, take the article on district standards and kind of just look at it in a vacuum. There are additional standards that would be applied to a particular use. So what I would suggest is try out some scenarios and run through those, and it could be for any particular use that you're interested in. And I've got an example. So, for an example, you own a piece of property and you're like, I want to build apartments. Or from your perspective, you're thinking someone's coming to us and they're making this request for apartments. What would be required of them? So I would start out first in your Article 6, which has the use matrix. And so here's just a quick screenshot from that use matrix. You can see the yellow circle there shows dwelling multifamily. If you were uncertain if this meant apartment, you could go to the definitions and check the definitions. But you can see here that dwelling multifamily is a by right use in the R3 district, the RC, and the MU. And you can also see to the far right that there are use performance standards, so those standards that help address impacts. And those are provided in section 7-3-5. So after that, you could go to that Article 7, 7-3-5 in particular, and look at those use standards. So then you can see, now I know what districts it's allowed in. Now I see the additional standards that are applied to the use. And so, I want to put this in an R3 district, or you could pick one of the others as well. So then you can go to Article 4, your district standards. There are some general standards that apply to all districts. Also some help there in terms of how things are measured, how things are identified. And then you can look at the R3 standards and see, okay, for multifamily, this is the required size, lot size. This is the setback requirements, height requirements, all of those things in the district standards. And then you can look at Article 8 to see, okay, what about the design of the facility, or, the structure itself? What landscaping is required? How much parking would be required? Are there lighting standards? All of that is in Article 8. And so, for example, if we're using this apartment in R3, you could see, okay, if I'm looking at this particular piece of property that's zoned R3, but it is adjacent to some R1 and some R2 properties, then I see I'm going to have to do type A transitional buffer. And then you can look at the next table down from that and see type A transitional buffer means that I, have to have a width of 15 feet, 2 large trees, 1 ornamental, and 6 shrubs. So you could even take this a step further from that and look at Article 3 that talks about the permitting and the site plan. So then you could look at site plans and see, this is a by right use, but what do they have to submit within the site plan requirements? So that's just one example that you can use. You can do this for any use that you have in mind, whether it's industrial, residential, commercial, and play through a few scenarios. I think that'll help you with your review to kind of get a full picture instead of kind of going, article by article and falling asleep and waking back up and trying to remember what you read. So that's just a few tips to help there. All right, so now the outstanding items, and this is where I will be done talking and looking to you all for some consensus and some direction. So the first outstanding item is the military overlay. So to catch everyone up and remind everyone, we drafted this text using the Joint Land Use Study, as well as the Department of Defense Practical Guide to Compatible Civilian Development. Also Army Regulation 200-1. We also used the Dahlgren Liaison Officer, talked with staff here, and then benchmark communities. Although I will say, in terms of benchmarking, it was a bit difficult because, Dahlgren is unique. And so not everything was exactly the same, and we had to sort of piecemeal some thoughts there. But we created the draft and came to the Planning Commission in May of last year. We discussed sub areas and standards. There were some edits that were agreed upon, and we have incorporated those. At that time, there were still about 8 additional things that we needed from Dahlgren. It included sub area intent statements, some frequency requirements, and any other standards that they wanted to include there. And so then in June, after that meeting, King George staff did let us know that they wanted to place a hold on this. And so we have not touched it any further. I will say you were provided, I think it's attachment D, maybe, in your packet, the drafted text. And then at the end of last week, I did receive from Dahlgren some additional text changes. So some of those items in that attachment are highlighted in yellow. The sub-area intent statements, they have provided that to me, but I don't believe that you all have that yet. They have requested to take out the frequency standards and other standards and not supply those. I'm not sure where we stand with the mapping, because there will need to be a map with this overlay as well that delineates the sub areas that the text talks about. And so in terms for you all to discuss, there's a couple of options here. We can, supply what Dahlgren has given us, put those edits in, work on the map and keep moving forward to have this in the ordinance. Or you can decide to remove it at the ordinance, continue to work on it if you want to at a later date, and then supply it in. It would be easy to insert within the ordinance if you wanted to do that. So I'll pause and turn the floor over to see what's the direction here.
Go ahead, sir.
I'll ask my colleagues if you have any questions or any comments upon what Ms. Cobb had shared with us. Also, Mr. Parker, I know that we have some representatives from NSASP here as well. I don't know if there's anything that they can maybe provide informationally, and if it would behoove to allow them to speak at all.
Sure. I have no objections. Anybody else have any objections? Sure.
I'm not sure if you guys have any information that you would want to share, but if you would like to. Captain Copeland, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Captain Todd Copeland, the commanding officer of Naval Support Activity South Potomac, which includes NSF Dahlgren here and NSF Indian Head. And just for some context on why I'm here, 19 years ago when CNIC was created, one of the things they put in place was a policy directed by the Secretary of Navy that the installation commanding officer is a sole voice for installations regarding encroachment and compatibility issues, which is why you get me. I'm the sole voice on that. And in that policy, it says that I will coordinate with mission partners across the realm to talk about encroachment, deal with encroachment. And I'm also the only person on the base and the staff who is allowed to have a community planning liaison officer whose sole job is to do community planning and liaison with all of you. Something else for CNIC is, due to some of the sins of the past, and think Oceana, think some of the other bases, we haven't been good partners in the past. That's one of the reasons CNIC was created, is to make sure that a base is a good partner with the community. Policy for CNIC is for us to have maximum transparency in what we do on an installation, regardless of the installation, to the community, whether it's Pearl Harbor, Whitingfield, Pensacola, or here. We have to do that. We don't have the option to say, no, we don't want to share, nor do we want to have that option. So our take on this is, like, we are happy to have the maximum amount of transparency. We're happy to assist in the military overlay. We're happy to make sure everyone is fully informed on what happens inside the fence that may somehow impact outside the fence. As an aviator, I grew up with that, living underneath flight paths, that depending on when you lived there, you may not have known when you bought that house you were underneath the flight path. We've learned from that, which is why CNIC came up with the policy that says, hey, installation commanding officers are going to be the sole voice. You guys make sure that you are being absolutely transparent, without any sort of exceptions on those kinds of things. So Thomas has been working. I know we went through some iterations last June, but that's why I'm here, to make sure everyone's fully aware that we, as an installation, NSF Dahlgren, NSF Indian Head, want to make sure maximum transparency and support of the military and what we can do to continue to help with that process. And I'll leave it there if you have any questions.
Thank you, Captain Copeland. Do anyone have any questions for Captain Copeland? Yeah, I appreciate it. I'll just share my feelings. I would like to see us included in. If there's more information that needs to be provided or more collaboration, then yeah, I think we need to do that. But like Oceana was brought up by Captain Copeland, it was a fantastic example of, I think, both sides probably not working together very well and setting up a situation for a lot of strife, because you have the community encroaching on the base and building, and then you have the base doing their activities, and they don't mesh real well, and some of those decisions by the community probably were not real wise either. So I think having good open communication with our partners on the base, and having an opportunity to codify it would probably be a good way to move forward. So, but I'll leave it to my colleagues. I obviously don't have the authority to make that decision solely.
I have a question, more of a welcome. The Defense Community Infrastructure Program is a grant of interest to both of us. If the base has identified any priorities or needs for local infrastructure that supports both the mission and improves public safety, we'd be happy to hear your perception of the needs. The JLU study is coming up. There's a variety of ways to tackle that. It needs a refresh. Basically, I think its bones are good. But if the installation has any perspectives on how best to produce an updated JLUS, we'd also be able to hear. There's some options on how we wrestle that one. But I look forward to hearing from the base.
So I appreciate the welcome for DSIP. Thomas is the guy on that. We are 100% on board with that, on partnering and going forward with that. And the JLUS is something that I brought up actually with the governor's office to go forward with that. We're trying to do a state one as well as a local one, but we are very interested in doing that, in updating that joint land use process. And Thomas is the guy on that. And then the other thing that I can provide, and we're happy to do it, is the capability gaps and capacity gaps that we have on base. There are certain things that I can't advocate for. I can't say I want a Buffalo Wild Wings or anything like that. But I can say when we're missing something on base, a great example is Indian Head. There was no grocery store anywhere within 25 miles. So we can articulate some of that sort of things on what it is that on base we can say we have a quality of life capacity shortfall or capability shortfall as this base has evolved, as the community has evolved, and things like that. So Thomas is able to articulate those things. We otherwise are fairly agnostic on how things go up in the town. That's not my business, but we can start, talking about different things like EV charging and anything like that that we have, that we see on base is a shortfall. So happy to give that information as well.
Go ahead, sir, please.
So back to the military overlay. I would welcome seeing what the base has provided to our contractor in terms of specifics for the overlay. My basic concern is I want the county to be a good partner with the base, but that means we need to understand what kind of things certain residents, developers need to pay attention to so that they don't interfere with the activities of the base within reason. Likewise, I want to be open and honest to any prospective home builder or other developer coming into the county and buying a parcel of land thinking he's going to do something, only to find out after the fact that they're somehow inadvertently impacting the base. I would like to think that all real estate people are completely honest with their clients, but mistakes still happen and certain things get omitted. And the last thing I want is for a resident to come in before either one of our boards and start complaining about, I thought I could do this and I can't. So I would very much like to see the draft that our contractor has put together for that overlay, so that we can sort of see if it meets those kinds of basic needs. Not looking for a whole lot of detail, not looking for absolutes, but we need to be able to tell developers you know, what's reasonable for them to do and what's not reasonable. So that's my concern.
Just a procedural question or maybe a business question. I know we've got on our agenda change order next steps with regards to incorporation of the military overlay district. How much, or is it incorporated in our existing ceiling, or would that require additional level of effort to include that and manage that and work it into the ordinances?
So we are near the end of that line for us. But because we were placed on hold, you know, and we were anticipating getting those changes, we can incorporate the changes that are given to us by Dahlgren. I think from what I saw Friday or Thursday last week, I'm not sure which day it was, but I think those text changes can be incorporated pretty easily. My bigger concern at this point is the map portion. We still don't have that. That will, you know, if Dahlgren can supply that, I think that's the timing factor. If that's something that they can get to us to incorporate, will be the kind of mark of whether this, you know, gets in and everyone can review it and be settled.
So regarding the map, the challenge and opportunity is that we have the map from the JLUs. The challenge is it's old, but the opportunity is like not much has changed in the sound attenuation issues that we have on the base, except maybe it's gotten a little bit better because railgun isn't firing anymore. But it's a dated, it's dated as far as however old it is. And when we do a new JLUS, we will update that map. But we have the one that is still accurate as of today. That I think we've gone back and forth with Thomas on a couple different versions of it, but we have that with the decibels on everything like that.
Right. So I think the map that I recall seeing was, it shows an area, it kind of outlines an area, but for the zoning purposes, we would need something that follows parcel boundaries. So is that something that map can be?
Yes. I'd say yes. Thomas Kapir.
Well, I think King George drafted a map that had parcels on it. I think between our GIS staff, I think we can definitely. I think we've made some drafts, and I think we could, produce some that the commission and the board of supervisors could look at. I think we already have a few drafts already. It's just a question of kind of you guys looking at them, and it's your product, and kind of determining which way you want to go with it.
I think Mr. Collins had a point to make.
Yes, comment for the board members and the commission. So thank you, Captain, for showing up tonight. Appreciate that. So as we go forth with the ordinance updates, zoning updates, and we hear recently our public speakers about noise. So, and they're talking about frequency, and the commander was talking about frequency. I would hope that the overlay would apply to the frequency outside of the base. The frequency inside the base is not of our control, but I think that we need to make sure that there's not a different ordinance for the military as opposed to data centers. Thank you.
So I think that I'm hearing, unless anyone has objection to this, but it sounds like incorporate the text changes that I have thus far from Dahlgren and provide you all with that copy, and have their staff and your staff work together on the overlay map. And from there, we can put it in the ordinance and make some final decisions on it. Is that anyone in disagreement with that? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move forward. So the other major outstanding item is with regard to industrial uses, and particularly data center, battery storage, and power plants. And so text was drafted using community engagement feedback, staff recommendations, looking at your adjacent localities. And then we met in May and July with the Planning Commission and discussed the use permissions, as well as the standards to go along with those. And Planning Commission provided us with edits, and we incorporated those. And where the Planning Commission sort of landed, to kind of refresh everyone if you haven't reviewed it, is the data center is special exception in the general trade and the industrial light district. It's by right in the industrial district, and there are standards associated with data center. Battery energy storage facility is by right in the industrial district, and there are standards associated with that. And then utility service major is the use term associated with the power plants, and it's a special exception in all districts. So that was the last direction from Planning Commission. We incorporated those edits through September, December. Staff continued to review use standards and provided us with additional edits for those, and we've incorporated those items. So some options now, since we've heard that you've received some additional interest and potential applications, even folks here speaking tonight about their interest. And so there's a desire for additional research and looking at how these are allowed and the standards associated with it. So we submitted a change order regarding that, and I will go over some of the details of the change order in just a bit. We do have some options regarding the change order that I'll also discuss with you. Or we could not do the change order and continue with the process as is and do just very minor edits, and I'll explain that in a bit as well. So first, for the change order, this is for data centers, battery storage, and power plants. We heard that you wanted research, and so we're going to do research for best practices from APA, as well as benchmarking from other localities. This would be selected by staff and not adjacent localities, because we've already done that. Looking at providing you a findings memo. So from that research, we would summarize what we found and then provide you with recommendations for your ordinance. We would also give a memo regarding what's already been drafted for your industrial text and industrial uses, just so you can kind of see that as a cohesive picture. And then we would have discussion through a couple of work sessions where we would talk about the industrial text that's been drafted, talk about the research, provide you with the recommendations, and then you give us feedback on the edits that you want to make, and we would be incorporating those edits. So you may be, having a few questions like, well, why are we doing this change order? Isn't this part of the project already? And so the scope says that we will do one round of revisions per article. And so when we provide the draft and we meet with the Planning Commission and we had discussion with them with our recommendations, they've provided us those edits and we have incorporated those edits. So that has fulfilled that portion of the scope. So when you want additional research, looking at additional localities, I've got to be paid to do that, unfortunately. And so that's why we're here discussing the change order. You might want, to consider also, how does this fit within the ordinance project, the bigger project? And so one thing I will say is that it will delay the project a bit. And that does cause me a little concern, just because in past projects, when it gets put on hold so that there can be concentration for several months on a particular topic, when you go to pick it back up again, you feel a little overwhelmed and a little lost in reviewing and continuing that process. So that's something to consider, and for that reason, I do also have some options for you tonight. So the first
Ma'am,
option, yes,
I think Mr. Collins had a question. Is it okay if,
yes.
or a comment at least?
Before we get too far into that, I'd just like to, I have actually three motions. We'll see where they go. A motion for a text amendment to the industrial district regulations in the current and the future zoning ordinance, moving battery energy storage facility, data centers, and solar farms from the use permitted by right to uses permitted only by special exception.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Any discussion? I'll let the Plan Commission, if you would like to jump in as well, since you're here with our meeting. I know this is a motion made and seconded for the board, but
Yeah,
if you would like to jump in, please feel free to provide comments.
So excuse me, the joint dance always gets a little confusing for me. So I don't mean to step on any
Nope.
toes while we're dancing.
I don't think we're stepping on toes. I think that's fair to allow you guys to weigh in that we're making a motion. Oh, we've had a motion made to make some changes to our ordinances without coming through you.
Well, that I think from a parliamentarian standpoint, they usurp us, correct? So it's theirs.
So yes, the
me.
board provides direction and they have final say. Should this motion be completed, staff would go and draft that text amendment and bring it back through the public hearing process. So Planning Commission will hold a public hearing as well as the board for final adoption.
Gentlemen,
I'd just like to hear the motion again.
Yes, sir. A motion for a text amendment to the industrial district regulation in the current and the future zoning ordinance, moving battery energy storage facility, data centers, and solar farm from use permitted by right to special exemption.
And just the industrial zone or all other areas that may just apply to industrial?
Well, battery storage and data center are only by right in industrial. So there's a couple where they are by special exception, like light industrial. So I don't think there would be a change to that. I think it would just be saying in any one that it's currently by right, it would be by special exception only is what Mr. Collins is asking for.
correct. In any other districts, it wouldn't be necessarily applicable.
In the motion, you said solar farms, data centers, and
Battery storage.
Battery storage. So that's my confusion. Solar farms can go up on A2, A1.
Correct.
Are they any power?
Any power generation project right now is by special exception only. That one could probably be removed.
Is
It
that
only by special exception, but the battery storage and the data center are currently by right in industrial.
does that just if I may, does that include inside the fence power generation for your own consumption? Or is that strictly power that you want to put on the grid for sale outside your facility?
I'm going to defer to Ms. Hall, but I believe if you have an ancillary use, then that would be not the project. That would be something you could do in that regards for generation for your own project.
That's correct. Under the current ordinance, if I have an industrial building and I wanted to put out solar to support only my building and met the guidelines of ancillary use, then that would not come before this board. However, currently in industrial, solar, battery storage, and data centers are all permitted by right. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm only just drawing that distinction between inside the fence use and putting it out on the grid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to be clear that if we do that, if that does succeed through all the public hearing processes, for the current ordinance, it will only create the requirements from the current current standard uses, current performance standards rather. It won't take the future performance standards and place it on the current ordinance. Right.
That was not part of his motion. It was just to take the current standards and make them by special exception only as opposed to by right.
So my comment would be is that in our internal discussions in the planning commission over the past couple of months, I've certainly become very concerned about that we don't have the proper guidelines and requirements in place for noise, as well as possibly some environmental type controls. So I think at some point in time when we get that nailed down better, I might be very open to allowing it by right in some places. But at the moment, I tend to agree with the comment about taking it out of the or keeping it out of the industrial area by right and making it only by exception. That way, it gives us in the planning commission and you and the board of supervisors an opportunity to really look at what is being proposed rather than dealing with it once it's already built.
Yeah, it keeps the cat in the bag.
Yes.
Any other discussion from anyone?
Gentlemen?
Miss Lackey, just have
So I think this is an excellent discussion. Clearly dovetails with what's going on, but for purposes of a vote on the motion, we did not have text amendment changes on the agenda. And this is the equivalent of a special meeting. So I would recommend that if there is, for a vote on the actual direction to staff on the text amendment, that perhaps it be continued to the February 7th agenda.
Mr. Collins, did you have something you want to say to that?
Yes, so previously in Board of Supervisors meetings, I have requested that be a regular board meeting, not a work session for a vote, but it is acceptable to do that. And it has occurred when I haven't been here, there's been a vote taken. So I don't know why this motion you can't have motions on the table in the work session if we've done it in the past.
I think what Ms. Lackey was saying, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, is that it was not part of the agenda to have this discussion in this vote, where you can advertise a work session, a special meeting, where you're talking about what business will be discussed and could be possibly voted on. It's what I heard, but I don't want to put words in Ms. Lackey's
Yes,
mouth.
so as a standard rule, your special meetings have a fixed agenda so that you only take actions on those specified items. If it's the will of the board, you could have, I believe it needs to be unanimous, you could suspend your rules of procedure should you want to take a vote this evening.
So one more comment on that. So there's nothing in the Robert's Rules of Order that says you can't take a vote. We are here discussing this, and it is in this book. So I think it's an appropriate motion tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have one other suggestion, is that this also could be put on the next agenda, the motion that we would discuss this, because I think it is very important, especially hearing from colleagues in Northern Virginia, best practices of what they did wrong that we need to be aware of and make sure we have our ducks in a row.
So you're asking, your compromise would be to, let's add it to the agenda for February 7th. I'll ask my colleagues.
I would be in favor of adding it to the agenda for the next meeting for additional discussion. However, I would not be willing to vote this evening on the motion.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Collins.
So the motion on the table has been seconded and would have to be voted on unless the person making the motion withdraws it. So at this time, I have 3 different motions in regards to this. So I will remove them from the table and request that they be put on the February 7th agenda.
I will have those added. If you could give me the 3 points in particular, I'll take those. I'll make sure we add discussion items for each of those. And we'll have it in the February 7th meeting.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair, Ms. Hall has pointed out that the issue of the change order is on the agenda. So to the extent that there needs to be discussion with regard to, you know, how to handle the change order, that's certainly in order. I just wanted to clarify that.
Understood. So it would not be making a text amendment to our existing ordinance, but to discuss this current change order request and what activities we want to do in regards to that.
Mr. Chair, clarify that. For tonight's meeting, that is correct to talk about the change order, but we were talking about the next meeting, talking about the current ordinances. I just wanted to clarify.
I think, yes, I think that's understood. Yes, ma'am. And I think it was just that Ms. Lackey was providing clarification that there can be votes in this meeting, but it has to be in regards to the change order discussion that we had on the agenda.
And I think I can help with some items that are on my slide here. So the kind of first two options are utilizing the change order, pausing the current process, conducting research of other communities and APA, having work sessions. The first one shows staff would take those recommendations to incorporate into the current ordinance, and we would take them and continue with the ordinance process. If you move down further, there's a change order light where we could sort of reduce some of the items within the change order. There's potential there for savings. It would depend on how much savings, depending on the things that you want to cut out. We could potentially use meetings that are already scheduled if you feel like you could move through things fairly quickly. If that didn't happen, we would have the option there that we could add an additional meeting to finish the discussion. And then there's the far right, which sounds like the motion that we heard, which is not doing the change order, editing the uses to require special exception in the districts. Then you can address each application and the impacts as it comes in. We wouldn't do additional research. We would continue with the ordinance process. So I think, you know, if that's something that you want to entertain, you could come to consensus tonight on sort of which track or focus you want to do here, and then you could work on your current ordinance at your next meeting and what would be incorporated there.
So if I may, I kind of had a thought, but since there's been some motions broached, would it be possible to hear all three motions, which might predicate the decision of the Planning Commission on which way we want to go forward?
Yes, sir.
If that's okay.
If Mr. Chair allows. The second one is a motion for a text amendment to Article 1, Section 1.9.3, special definitions of a current zoning ordinance, amending the definition of data center to a single building used primarily for storage, management, processing, and transmission of digital data, which houses computer or network equipment, systems, servers, appliances, or other associated components related to digital data operations, such as a building may also include air handlers, power generators, water cooling, storage facilities, utility substations, and any other associated utility infrastructure to support sustained operations at a data center. That's 2. And then the third one is a motion for a text amendment, Article 1, Section 1.9, that's 3 specific definitions of the current zoning ordinance, adding the definition of data center campus as more than one data center or a partial, and include data center campus in use permitted only by special exemption in industrial district regulations.
So I know those are Mr. Collins's motions. I'm just letting you know as well, though, that obviously Mr. Collins favors those, but that might not necessarily be what a majority of the board.
Just curiosity.
It's kind of a little.
No, I'm sorry. Again,
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I watched every one of your meetings, and I appreciate the intense amount of work that's been put into the revisions of the ordinance. I listened to all your discussions. Online, I didn't, I didn't do public comment online, but I listened and made a lot of notes when we got the draft. So I just want to thank you all for your diligent work. It's a great job, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I know this is a little bit different, making these motions, but we have this, we have some situations in front of us that I think we need to get out ahead of it sooner than later. So you keep the cat in the bag.
Exactly. Sir?
Mr. Chairman, this is probably just a procedural question, but I'm a newcomer to the Planning Commission. I did attend, as a member of the public, a Berkeley Group public information session a long time back, probably December or thereabouts, of 21. Is it too late? Is it not too late for me to submit as a Planning Commission member a few remarks and suggestions on some statutory construction type things here for consideration? Am I timed out of doing that at this point? I hope not.
It's
But
a working session.
So as part of this project, we do have, right now, the way it's scheduled, we would have an open house for the public to provide comments, and then we're going to have 2 additional work sessions, and I would say that would be a perfect opportunity for you to share those with the
well,
full
this
planning
may be a
commission.
little more than a 3-minute podium type of thing. So what would be the view of the Planning Commission on a new member being able to have the benefit of the consideration of the other Planning Commission members for some issues related to this?
I think it might be better if we bring it up at our next meeting.
Okay.
I mean, what do y'all think? I said, I think it may be better if we bring it up at our next planning commission meeting. And I mean, is that,
Yes, because we would need consensus of the planning commission.
right? I think
so that
I'm
we don't have one member giving us left-hand turns and another member giving us right.
right. I think if Ms. Lackey, if I'm not reaching too far, but it kind of falls under the bucket that you just described, correct? It's not an agenda item necessarily, so.
Yeah, so I think the question, what is, it dovetails with the presentation with what are the next steps and when is input. So I think that you have your answer that either a future meeting of the Planning Commission or one of the scheduled work sessions, those would be opportunities to bring substantive content on the current draft provisions.
And staff can add that as an agenda item if that's the will of the commission.
Okay, can I circulate amongst the planning committee members?
Yeah.
Should I copy anybody else or?
Send it to Ms. Hall, and then she can disseminate it out. So it's not-
Usually we submit it to Ms. Hall, and Ms. Hall distributes it.
Yeah.
If you do it to all of us, you're essentially creating a public meeting
you're having a de
online,
facto meeting.
which you can't do. So to Ms. Hall, ask her to distribute, and we can provide comments back the same way.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. Thank you very much.
But
I'll do
those
that.
comments will come back to me, not to the entire commission.
Correct.
Again, we can also put that as an agenda item so we can have an open discussion.
Oh, well, I want to make sure I'm hearing the same thing. I mean, if I direct comments to you, you'd circulate them to the other planning committee
sir.
members.
And then
Wonderful.
we'd reply in kind back to Ms. Hall, and she'd disseminate them.
Sure. So
Look
you'll be the
at me
point
as
of
the
contact.
filter.
That's right.
Yes.
You're the gatekeeper on that.
I'm the
Conduit.
gatekeeper.
All right.
That's right.
Got it. Thank you.
So sort of in the same light, there's one item that's been bothering me for the last couple of meetings, and that is it's unclear to me whether as a county we actually have a sound ordinance or not. And I realized that, Berkeley Group was asked to take our existing ordinances and work with it. But I'm talking about if we don't really have one, which I don't think we do, is I would like to create one. And for me, doing it as part of this update would be preferable rather than us coming in after the fact and then modifying this, at a later date. So again, I'll send you something and we'll put that on our agenda for our.
Are you talking about the sound ordinance, Mr. Kendrick?
Yes.
We did have that discussion. It is in the administrative code. The discussion was whether it's translatable to the subdivision ordinance.
Yeah,
We do have a noise ordinance, but it's not part of the zoning ordinance.
I want it in as a requirement, for development. And
So
my
it's,
understanding is that it needs to come into the ordinance.
so are you speaking to that as where the Fairfax were mentioning a part of the site plan process where there would be a noise study?
It came up as part of our discussion about, potential data centers, battery storage, all that kind of stuff. But, in our discussions, it's I think it applies to across the different, zoning areas. So I would like to see it brought up as one of those requirements that would go into the zoning ordinance.
I think that brings us right back to what's on the agenda right now. Which is,
I bring it up only because I'm going to send it to you and we'll handle it the same way we're handling the other issue. But
well, this is the item on the agenda. So the question is, do we want Berkeley Group to do it? Do we want to slow down this process of the whole ordinance being revised?
And if I may, I'll add a couple of thoughts about noise ordinance. So we do recommend that you have a noise ordinance that lives outside of your zoning ordinance. And that's because state code references in some uses that you can't be more restrictive on their sound than you are on your noise ordinance. And so then if you don't have the noise ordinance, you're kind of in a bind with restricting at all that use. But if there are particular uses that you have concerns with that you want to address that impact within the zoning ordinance, then that could be within the use performance standards for that particular use to say, not above this frequency or this decibel or, what have you. So there's kind of two things to consider there.
So I think a couple of my colleagues had some points. Mr. Collins tapped me first, so I'll let him go and then I'll.
So, Mr. Kendrick, I agree with you. I think that they should be incorporated in here and they can live alone also. But, there's plenty of text out here to copy and paste that would fit into this, but the noise ordinance needs to be the same for the entire county, not by districts. And, we talk about the data centers and the military overlay. So I think that it all goes together and it should be situated in this ordinance revision. Thank you.
Ms. Binder.
I agree, just for, because different things that could create an ordinance, a noise concern would be generators for solar, for data, for battery storage, because they all use generators. But then we have to be careful because when there's a power outage, our citizens run a generator. So, that would be one area that I would have some issue with, but I really do think it's important because with all the talk, as Mr. Kendrick said, with data center, battery storage, solar farms, I've talked to a lot of supervisors from other localities, and especially Loudoun and Prince William, and a lot of them say, please don't do what we didn't do. We didn't know because we started this, we were the first to do it. So make sure that you have your ducks in a row in your house in order before you let all this development in, so that you have everything in place so that you're not like us and then wish you had done it. They didn't know because they were the first to do it. But it's really important, especially on the noise. Prince William currently right now is rewriting their noise ordinance because of the Great Oak subdivision and all that. And they admit they need to beef theirs up. And then I think that's why the town of Warrington is also doing it. So I think it is very important we tackle this as part of it. Thank you.
Ms. Kupka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple things. First, with regard to the noise ordinance. So I would remind my colleagues that in the December 6th meeting, I sought consensus and everyone on the board agreed to direct the county attorney to revisit the noise ordinance for us. So that has already been put into motion. I don't disagree with Mr. Kendrick. There are obviously some aspects that would have some overlap with regard to zoning and subdivisions. I think there's a bigger picture here, and it's not just military noise is not just data center noise. It could be, we had folks from Fairview Beach come at length last year and give public comment about the noise they were hearing from somewhere in their neighborhood, a business. So maybe there are things we need to look at the citing of establishments that have noisy features and whether we want those in abutting residential neighborhoods, or, if it's zone commercial all the way around, maybe there is some loosening that we could do for that. So there's a much bigger discussion that I think we need to have with regard to the noise ordinance. I do have some suggested ones that some of the citizens emailed to me that I can send to you, Ms. Lackey, if you would like to see those for consideration. That might cut down some of your legal research time. But yeah, obviously noise is definitely something that we need to move forward with. Then my other question is with regard to, so I pulled up the December 20th meeting, the change order from Mr. Williams, and the price for that came in at $23,514.90. And there's a table with a lump sum fee. So what is the correlation of the change order that was previously presented to the board in December? And where does that correlate? Is that industrial uses ordinance tract? Is that fast track? I'm hoping change order light is going to be less than this. I'm hoping is what I'm really hoping here. I'm going to tell you, because I personally would really like to see what change order light looks like, because I feel like it's in the middle. It allows us flexibility. I feel like on the right, the ordinance focus is we're only going to consider special exception. On the left, we're only going to consider industrial by right, and change order light gives us options and flexibility.
So, yes, the kind of first two columns there would be just change order, the 23,000 or whatever it was listed there. The change order light, I can't give you a number on that. I mean, I can't say, oh, that's going to be 10,000, 12,000, or 18. It's going to depend on your decisions. So, for example, if you say, just research these two communities, we're hearing lots of good things from them, just research these two communities and bring us back your recommendations, then that cuts those line items for research and reporting back. And if you want that report back to not necessarily be, here's everything that they included and here's what we're recommending, if you're feeling more trusting of us, just to say, just give us your recommendations, then that reduces some hours on that line. As well as the meetings. Right now, we've scheduled 2 additional meetings to cover this topic. But if you feel like you can address that in one meeting, then that's a savings of $3,000, because it's about $3,000 for us to come and conduct a meeting. And then there's the option, though, that if that doesn't work, cutting down the meetings, then you can go back to, yeah, we need another meeting, and you would pay for that. I will also add, if you're going to explore additional noise things, I could see that going in the community design standards. You've got your lighting, your landscaping, it would be an item for noise. That would be a change order, and we would have to address, how much research and what types of things you want there, and then provide you a cost for that if you wanted to pursue that.
Thank you. And can I just make one point, not really a question, Mr. Chair? So I just want to point out to everyone, Planning Commission and the board, that in the change order, it says meeting cancellations, meetings and work sessions canceled with notice of less than 10 business days will be counted toward the scoped work sessions, and the client will be charged for the preparation hours for the canceled meeting. So if we say they're going to come to the meeting, we need to have the meeting, because I don't want to pay to not have the meeting. Thank you.
All right, so what I heard is if the board wanted to move forward with the change order light, then we would need to provide you some more information, and then you would provide us with a quote for a change order, and then we'd have to wait till the next meeting to make a motion on that, if that was the desire of the board.
Correct.
Okay. I'll ask my colleagues. I feel like we've really branched off a whole bunch. So Ms. Kupka, thank you. Kupka, thank you for bringing it back to the options. I'll ask my colleagues for their input upon what you would like to see, so we can give this the Berkeley group the direction, and we can make a motion. Hopefully that will, or not make a motion, but we can at least give direction.
I have a quick question just on change order light. So is change order light, and anything we bring up, what kind of research would be done with change order light? Is it very surface, or is it semi deep dive? What's the kind of information on any of the topics we would bring up?
So we would look at APA for best practices, any recommendations that they have. We would look at any communities that you suggest. So, for example, I think, Warrenton was mentioned tonight. If that's on the list, then we would look at that and see what are they providing, what is in their ordinance. Same thing with any other community. We would look and see what are the standards that they are providing, and then see, what we think is best fit for you all.
Okay, thank you. So you need the topics now. That's where I was coming.
I'm asking, so we have 4 options up there. Which one are you in favor of? And if it's change order light, do you have any input on some information to provide back to the Berkeley group so we can scope it so they can provide us an estimate?
Yes. And I will, do you want me just to start?
We'll start with you, Ms. Binder, yes.
Because I don't mind going last, but if you want to start with me, that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to bring up noise ordinance, as you mentioned, in maybe the community design standards. And the big one I hear in the industry is Warrington's noise ordinance. So I would bring that up. Just looking at our even ordinance in here, our data center ordinance is subpar, and even in here, the paragraph that it is. So that would definitely have to be beefier, in my opinion. And I would bring up Loudoun County or Prince William County. I would have to relook at my notes to give any other example, but those would be ones that have a lot of data centers at the moment, so they would be ones that we should look at, not Carolina or spot places that don't have them. And then concerning solar and battery storage, I have some questions on those, but I can't give you an example off the top of my head to bring out. Oh, and one more thing, sorry. I just had a quick question. It's in the beginning is in this document, and it would maybe go with change order light. That's why I bring it up. Is there's a mention a lot about affordable housing, and there's not really a definition in there. I don't know if that, because there is no real definition if I found it even at the state level. So, because that drives some of what's inside of it.
Thank you, Ms. Binder. Mr. Collins, did you want to let us know which one you are in favor of?
So originally I'm pays you a certain amount of money and to do a particular job in that particular ordinance on data centers, battery storage, and solar was kind of just went over and not really paid attention to. As the subdivision, when the planning commission and you went over it in great detail. So one was not done in detail and one was done in detail. So I don't know what the original work order was to basically not do that one. So I still think it's in your what we originally paid you to do that. Now the noise should be what we paid you also. So I mean, how much does a noise ordinance cost to, let's say, go look at Warrenton, copy and paste it, and bring it here and charge us $3,000 for a meeting to show us something that we can see ourselves? So I still think that this, even with the data centers and storage units and stuff, I still think it's in the scope of what we've already paid you to do. I find that what happens on this board is that we have contracts after contracts and everybody always coming back for another bite of the apple because data centers is real popular right now. So they say we can make some more money on that. That's how I feel. Thank you.
Mr. Stonehill?
Do you have any answers for Mr. Collins on that? Or any of his questions or?
Sure. I didn't really hear questions. I heard a disagreement with what I said, and that's okay. But you know, during the planning commission meetings, we did touch on those. In fact, we talked about, you know, not allowing those uses by right, that it might be better to have it as special exception in the industrial districts. And it was at that time determined planning commission wanted to keep those by right items. So they were discussed. And we feel like we did our due diligence to look at the communities that we were requested to address the use standards, and we've done that. And so when we're asked to revisit and look at additional research, then we have to, you know, pay for that request. You know, if you're remodeling a house and you ask someone to, you know, paint the walls and then you change the color, they're going to ask you to give them some more money to keep painting. And so that's what we're doing here.
Okay, I think that's pretty much common sense, but you know, some of these things, as Mr. Collins said, I mean, there's a lot of detail in some of these, and then there's very little detail in some of them. It's just what makes the difference. And you know, if I was going to go forward with the change order light, I would certainly want a fairly good noise study put in there. I mean, noise has been over the years, you know, anywhere from barking dogs to, you know, motorcycles, chainsaws, early Sunday mornings and things like that. I mean, that's obviously outside of this, but the noise definitely needs to be studied for uses, industrial uses, the dump, the industrial park, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I would definitely want to see that. And then also see information on the overlay, if that's not included. You know, that's something that we need to address as well. So if there's extra charge for that.
You talking about the military overlay?
Correct.
Okay.
Is that?
That would not, we are still in that line item and still providing the round of edits for that.
Okay, so that is still in there. But yeah, the noise would certainly be one of my biggest concerns on that.
Were you interested in seeing them revisit the data center and the battery storage, or just looking at noise only?
Yeah, I think that those new industrial uses, battery storage, solars, you know, those certainly need to be looked at a little bit more. I mean, I was looking at one of them; it was just like 2 paragraphs, maybe. But yes, I think we definitely need to go back and revisit that.
Did you have any localities in particular that you would like to see used as comps? I know Ms. Bidner provided, I think, Loudon and Prince William. And if not, that's fine. Town of Warrenton, I think in particular for noise. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, I would use the newer ones, and maybe look at some of the older ones, and then down in Mecklenburg, I guess they have a brand new one that's up as well. But definitely, you know, like some of our citizens said, you know, let's look at the ones that they did wrong, and then see how we can correct that, make sure we're doing that right.
Thank you, Mr. Stonehill. Ms. Kupka? Did you want to provide any localities that you, okay. Are you in favor of the change order light then? Is that? Okay, I just want to make sure. So if there was a majority of the board that wanted to go that route, then we would go that route. I'm in favor of the change order light as well. I think we hit some localities. Mecklenburg was one of the ones I was interested in seeing added. So I think Mr. Stonehill got that. So Mr. Collins, I see that you have something you want to say. I'll let you go.
So in the original contract, I'm waiting for our attention.
Yes, sir.
In the original contract, does it spell out how much energy you'll spend on each thing? Or does it say that you're going to revamp the whole thing? My understanding is it says revamp the whole thing, so there shouldn't be an additional cost. There shouldn't be a industrial fast track or change order like. There should be finish the job, what you're getting paid to do, unless the contract specifically says otherwise.
The contract says that we will have one round of revisions for each article. We have done that round of revisions. It says that, you know, when we get into the end, there will be small tweaks, but when we are asked to do additional research and add, you know, whole big chunks of text, and that is additional work beyond what is in the scope.
You would like to hear from Ms. Lackey?
Yes, I would.
Ms. Lackey, could you give your opinion as legal counsel in regards to that evaluation of the contract?
So it's always a delicate balance when you scope a project. When you scope a project, and I was not involved with the scoping of this project, I'll go ahead and say that. But when you contract for work, you don't get work for free. So if your scope is so broad that it would allow you to endlessly change and add things, then your initial price would probably be very costly. So from what I am aware of, and of course it'll boil down to what's in the change order light, I'd be happy to look and see if I see any duplication of effort. But I think it is reasonable that if you have a consultant perform a certain scope of work, they have an expectation on a number of hours, a number of work sessions. If that's spelled out and then additional work is required, then it is out of scope.
Thank you, Ms. Lackey. I think I heard consensus. Ms. Bender, did you have something?
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question, Ms. Lackey.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
As you mentioned that with Berkeley, there's one set of revisions, correct? Was that correct? So when we go through this document at the end and we have some minor tweaks or little tweaks, you're able to do that, right, Ms. Lackey, if there is, and we wouldn't have to go through a revision process. Is that correct?
Right. So as counsel to the board, at some point in time, you know, Jessica and I would be happy to work on tweaks. But you know, when you're talking about these major provision changes and looking for expertise of folks who are in the industry, you know, that's a decision for the board for what level of review and expertise you want on certain topics. But certainly, if it's a legal change or you know, any change going forward to the zoning and subdivision ordinance, that's something that we could do in-house.
All right, there, thank you.
So does the Berkeley Group have expertise in battery energy storage, data centers, and noise ordinances?
So we can use our planning expertise to look at other communities. We can consult the APA and bring back recommendations to you.
What's the APA?
American Planning Association.
Okay, thank you. We always throw acronyms around, and
Sorry.
And I have to say, I did appreciate the lovely glossary in the back.
I think I've heard a majority of the board in favor of the change order light. So if we could have a change order provided at the next meeting, detailing, I guess, including the noise ordinance discussion, going back to look at data centers, I guess adding Prince William, Loudoun, and Mecklenburg in particular. Did we want to remove Caroline County and Spotsy, like from evaluation at all?
I would just recommend for data centers. I mean, obviously Spotsy could be for solar because they have a massive solar facility, but none of them have a data center. So it's kind of useless to look at people that don't have a data center. You want to look at people that actually have been involved in the process.
Okay. Thank you. I think I summed it up unless any of my colleagues, I know Mr. Collins doesn't agree, but if anyone had any other requests in regards to the change order light. Ms. Cobb, do you feel like you understand what we're asking, or is there clarification you need further?
I feel like I understand. I'll repeat back just to make sure we are on the same page.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
I would be looking at noise ordinance and using Warrenton as a reference for that. Looking at data centers and using Mecklenburg, Prince William, and Loudoun for research purposes there. Solar, what were the localities that you would want?
I don't have off the top of my head, but I know Spotsy has a rather large solar center, and there's several counties down, I think Lancaster, Northumberland, that have massive solar in Southwest Virginia. But off the top of my head, I just can't. Essex, Mr. Collins said.
So do you want,
Westmoreland?
do you want to just say, well, you know, 2 localities, and I can, you know, confer with staff and we can select 2 or 3? What are the thoughts there for solar?
Sure.
Mr. Collins?
So I guess if you're going to just pick a couple counties, I guess I would pick something like Essex and Spotsylvania, since they're our neighbors. So that would be if you're going to do 2.
Ms. Bender, are you amenable to that?
Yeah, I'm fine. I just have a question at the very end when you've gone through all your.
Mr. Stonehill, Ms. Kupka, okay.
All right, so that's the details that I have, that it's basically 3 localities for data center, the 1 for noise, and then 2 for solar. And those are the topics that you would want researched.
I think those are topics. I'll ask Mr. Stone. Fair enough. Were there any other localities anyone was interested in from a noise ordinance perspective, or just Warrenton? Okay. Planning Commission. I don't want to dump you out of this discussion as well. Is there any input you guys, localities in particular, any revisiting that you really think would be of value as well?
So if I may, just to kind of kick a little thing off here. So I've heard a couple comments. Appreciate all the comments too. Thank you. And I think as we came through them, and I'll ask the gentleman to agree or disagree with me. I know some of to Mr. Stonehill's point, I know we do have some areas that are quite verbose and others that are not. Some of those have been, I guess, predicated to a degree on state code and, things were already there, for lack of a better word, and they've been modified. Some, like our newer amenities like data centers and things like that, are somewhat new and dynamic, so we're still coming through those, and obviously this is a good opportunity to address those with whatever level of specificity or granularity we see fit. I will also say, I think with regard to the contract itself, we, as the Planning Commission, obviously don't have the insight into the budgetary and fiscal elements that you all do. So while we're extremely sensitive to it, we also understand that the contract, as Ms. Lackey said, does have some limitations. I think if I could just assuage anyone's concerns about potentially increasing it, would be that, we don't do this very often, right? We haven't come through any updates since '87, right? So I imagine there's some people in here that weren't alive then. And the world has changed a whole lot since 1987. So it's probably worth, I say that to say it's worth our due diligence to go ahead and put the time and effort into it now to make sure that what we have as a finished product that we can all say that we're confident in, and is not just a finished document, but also, I guess, to a degree, a living document that doesn't bound us to things that we may have to back out of in a couple years or what have you. But again, using the cat in the bag analogy, it's a whole lot easier to let the cat out slowly than to let it out all at one time and try to get it back in. So those are my 2 cents. I'll turn it over to my other planning commissioners for questions, comments, concerns, hopes, fears, et cetera. So, gentlemen.
Well, I think we did kind of drive this change order without realizing it. We didn't know the scope of the contract going in, and we were kind of thrown for a loop when it came down to the noise from data centers and battery storage. We don't have the expertise, and we were seeking the expertise, and we directed staff to do that. We did not know we were going beyond the scope.
So I would certainly second that comment. If we pushed for more than we should have, we didn't realize we were doing. I would just make a comment that, you know, something like this, we may only do a major rewrite over so many years, but it's a constantly evolving thing. And we don't know, you know, at least for myself sitting on the planning commission, I don't know what I don't know until I'm presented with an issue that causes me to have to dig into it. And, you know, data centers were one that did that. And digging into that issue caused the sound one to pop up, the noise ordinance. So, you know, I would hope that we don't run into brand new items in the next year or two. But, you know, we'll be doing minor changes on this until the end of time. So.
Mr. Chairman, I just request that we add to the agenda for the next meeting that we'll make a little time to cover the points that I will submit to Ms. Hall.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Yep, absolutely. Can we capture that with Mr. Fox soon?
Thank you. And Ms. Cobb, I assure you they'll be in the nature of tweaks.
It's a scientific term. Tweak.
Yeah, I have to, I'll agree that part of the delay was due to the military overlay definition, discussion, boundary issues, and we're certainly responsible for part of that. I would like to say that the issue of affordable housing, thank you for bringing that up. Our ordinance is fairly silent on that. The Code of Virginia 15.2 addresses that, defines that, gives localities the opportunity to trade off density for building affordable housing to state criteria. And I think that should be the very next priority. We have the base population that is our consumers. We need that. These people are living in Stafford and Fredericksburg and hotels and not here in King George when you're here for their 4, 6 month, 9-month programs. So I'd like to put affordable housing on Planning Commission's agenda unless the Board of Supervisors does not want to go that way.
Chairman Parker, this is Kevin Myers. I just wanted to chime in just for a second. I think the use-specific noise performance standards are definitely necessary on the data centers.
Thank you, Mr. Myers.
Another question, if I may, for the change order is we didn't talk about power plants. So that was part of this original change order. Is that to be included here, or are we kind of trying to switch out power plant for noise? What do you want?
I thought we had solar was on there.
That was one of the two topics I was going to bring up at the end is thinking about it. We do have other ones on the horizon. So solar would be part of a utility, I guess would be or not be part of a utility because you have hydrogen, nuclear. How is that? Because that's a big, that solar kind of goes in that utility section.
So we do solar utility separate, and we could do your power plant in terms of hydrogen or those types of things as its own use if you want to address that.
Is that what you're looking for, Ms. Binder?
Well, those are, as it's public knowledge, we do have somebody who's interested in hydrogen bringing to, and that is something, I mean, not even in the world, that's a new and improving. We would be like Loudon and Prince William to be in front of the curve, do you know what I mean? So that probably would be something we need to look at. I don't know how that would be scoped in. Special exception, yeah.
It is currently by special exception only for any energy and development. So there is that wicket that it would have to go through. But No,
No, it's not?
So, not currently, but the proposed. Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's what we're talking about is our proposed ones here.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to include it in the proposed, we can. I will say, I think some of the reason for this discussion tonight was because of the concern of the price point. And what I'm hearing is adding to the change order and not taking away from the change order. So I want to make you all aware that when the new change order light comes, it probably is no longer light, that it has increased by adding additional, noise and keeping power plant and all of those things.
So I'll ask my colleagues, do you want to remove anything or?
Can you itemize that when you,
Yes,
that you
so
can kind of, it's almost like an à la carte menu. They can
Yes.
decide what they want to take off or whatnot.
Absolutely.
Okay, that would definitely help. Mr. Collins?
So, Mr. Parker, you did bring up a good point about the 1987, and the other members agreed that it hadn't been done in this period of time and the cost associated. So it flips me back on the other scale of being more acceptable towards it. It's a good point. I also would like to bring up that maybe that these ordinances can be brought up in piles of maybe 5 or 10 per meeting and reviewed every so often to make it less burdensome in the end. The other thing is that in the noise ordinance, I would hope that it would be included in enforcement. Who enforces it? I don't think that my view on this is I don't think Heather should be going out and listening to Fairview Beach at 9 o'clock at night. But I also don't think that the sheriff should be out at data centers checking the noise. So that'll be a tough one to figure out who will be in compliance for that. Now, as far as my public comment on data center is, it may sound like some of these things are against data centers. I'm actually not against data centers. I'm for data centers, but I want to be able to control what we're going to have here in King George, what the citizens want, and be able to. We want these things. We just want them to where the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors can make sure it's right for our community. Thank you.
Do you have anything else, Ms. Bender?
Yes, as Mr. Parker mentioned, it was 1987. When I was recently with a bunch of my colleagues at the local government day for VACO, you'd be surprised at several other localities that haven't updated their ordinance, one in particular in Northern Virginia since 1978. So we are not the only one that's going through this. But the biggest takeaway, we need to do it right. We have a lot of people coming very fast at us, and we have to make sure our house is in order, as it was put very well by one of the Prince William supervisors who is a data center proponent. They said, make sure you do it right and you know what you're getting and spend the time, which we didn't in the beginning, to do it right. And I think that's very, very important. And one thing I wanted to mention to the Berkeley group, being at the local government day, you may want to watch some bills that are currently going through and one is particular about notice for development projects and public hearings. And they're thinking about changing some of the standards. So it might be something, and you probably are abreast of that.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm not sure if Mr. Watkins had anything. I thought he was going to at one point.
I did, but I don't remember now. Yeah. No, I remember going through the noise ordinance, and we kind of left it how it was because it was such a large scope until the data centers proposal came up, and we said, wait a minute, this is not going to work. So we kind of, I guess I can't say we tabled it, but we asked the Berkeley group to do some more research on it, on the amount of noise coming in. Like Mr. Parker said, we didn't know about the budget, how much it is, but I think to do right by the citizens, I think we need to do as much research, get as much information as we can on the noise and everything else that's going to go around the data centers and other things that make noise in the county. Sure, you look at the Facebook pages, everybody's complaining about the booming and the dogs and all that stuff about every night. And the osprey is flying over from AP Hill. We can't help those. But I think for the citizens, I think they would be more open, maybe for more money being spent if they see, hey, they're spending more money doing their research on noise beside just saying, yeah, just throw the data centers in there and let them go.
Mr. DeVries?
Yep. Can I just say one thing about Mr. Collins was talking about enforcement? When we discuss noise, and correct me on our side if I'm wrong, we were looking at modeling noise much the same way that lighting is modeled in a site plan. We were looking at modeling for anticipated noise. We weren't really talking about any kind of enforcement of that after the fact. I think that would be going back to the administrative code, wouldn't it, Ms. Hall?
Essentially, if you're putting it in the zoning ordinance, it is community development's responsibility to enforce. That being said, the county code is currently where our noise ordinance is held and is enforced by the sheriff's office. So I do think that there's a delicate balance of what should be community development's responsibility versus the sheriff's office or a third party.
But that's not going to confuse Ms. Cobb's, the way Ms. Cobb addresses this in her, I guess, change order light. It doesn't complicate things, does it?
No, I mean, it comes down to a decision for you all in terms of if you want it in your ordinance and enforced by Ms. Hall's office, or if you feel like that's not appropriate. And that gets back to, we talked about particular uses. If it's, for, data centers, then there could be a standard that's just in data centers that her office could enforce. And so then she's not responding, on the weekend. It could be at other times that are appropriate. Whereas if it's a club or a party or something like that, it could be in the noise ordinance for amplified noise, and the police could enforce that.
So if I may too, though, I think a lot of this discussion has been generated by potential noise created by data centers. And I think if we put that in an ordinance, it would disincentivize a business from creating something noisy in the first place, right? They would know coming into it that their facilities have to be under a certain threshold, and hopefully then again disincentivize the creation of something that would be in excess of whatever decibel level we state is in excess. So I mean, is that something, Mrs. Cobb, you found in other facility or other localities that?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that's, in solar, it talks about, decibels from property line. And so that's why I asked the question, in the beginning, is this, in community design standards for everything in the community, or is this particular to specific uses? Because that does make a difference.
I see in the ordinance update, we still have the old standard, 65, 55, and 55 at night, dB. I think as part of a submission for any enterprise asking for a variance, or any enterprise that creates noise, as part of the community impact statement that they have to do along with their environmental, their water quality, everything else, is an acoustic survey, which is a standard industrial technique. It costs about 10 grand. And so if during the community impact process, the noise is identified as a impact, then I think we can and should require a acoustic survey as part of the submission, part of the package. We're not regulating per se, but we can establish those impacts, get public comment, and have the Board of Supervisors do their magic without touching the ordinance. We just have to get the noise ordinance racked down to, it's the continuous noise. And frankly, most of the new data centers are water cooled, they're not air or fan cooled, and are a lot quieter and a lot more community tolerant. But I think Mr. Stonehill actually has some actual experience instead of book learning.
Mr. Stonehill?
I've been kind of quiet here during the noise thing, so trying to cut down on the noise. But noise is noise is noise is noise. I mean, obviously, we're going to have to come up with a standard for the county for industrial noise. Is it going to be solar, which is kind of quiet, or is it going to be, a hydrogen plant? Is it going to be a data center? Is it going to be a concrete plant? Whatever. I mean, are you going to be able to come up with one, like, we're going to be able to come up with a number and say, you'll have to be below this number, and it's not going to be, boom, boom music on a boat in the summertime or barking dogs or mini bikes. It's going to be an industrial noise because, we keep going back and forth of solar and power plants and all this kind of stuff. But what happens if somebody comes and they bring some other type of business here that's not on our list? I mean, are we going to be able to have one number that all industrial standards are going to have to be at or below?
So we can, that would be the option of putting it in your community design standards to say, yeah, all industrial uses, this is your limit. And I think, we would need to probably have a couple of numbers there. One for consistent, noise that is happening versus, booming of truck doors and, those types of things. I'm thinking, I think you mentioned, concrete plant and stuff like that. So there's those sudden booms, which can be louder than just a hum of a solar facility or something like that. So I think in that regard, we would have to consider some options there, but we can discuss it in the way that you're talking about.
Because in this ever-changing world, it's, every couple of months we get a new, we approve a brewery, thank goodness. And then, now the new thing are distilleries or micro wineries and things like that. It seems like, when we do something, there's another little pop-up right after that. So how do we come up with a catch-all type thing? I mean, I know it's not really possible to get a whole catch-all, but, let's stay ahead of some of these new little things that are trending. So.
Can I chime in? I was in the power business for about 20 years and built a lot of power plants. In an industrial setting, it's usually a question of what is it relative to. Noise relative to your neighbor, noise relative to a residential zone at a point, geographic point, right? Where are the decibels getting to from where they're created as they emit out over a noise cone? Where do they get to over 50 feet, 75 feet, 100 feet, and so on and so on. So it's always relative to who's listening to it. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did it make a noise, right? We need to be mindful of, rather than putting arbitrary numbers onto things, it's always about the impact of who's potentially hearing it and what is their interest in the matter. A resident has a different interest than another industrial who's doing similar noise next door, the wall in between, maybe. So that's one way I'd like to suggest you approach coming up with a figure.
I think change order ultralight would be to get Mr. Fox to write this. Volunteer.
Mr. Collins, did you have something?
So when you speak of noise, there's frequency and all that, and you're exactly right about who hears it. So that's an important thing to do with the districts and so forth and so on. So I hear you on that, and I understand that, but there is a base number, of noise that is not acceptable. So
other than when you have OSHA provided safety features required by the people, again, who's hearing the noise? Is it a guy with OSHA provided safety equipment on, or is it somebody sitting in the backyard reading a newspaper? They have different.
So someone brought up generators, home generators. I mean, there's a lot of things you could put in an exception, like power.
There's also emergency exceptions. Right. In the case of a unscheduled outage, as we'd call it, you're allowed certain non-compliances from your regular regime of emissions or noise or whatever it be to deal with emergencies only, that kind of thing. And it gets complicated, but so as not to complicate it, I'd only suggest that, yes, we may have a baseline figure, but then it may be varied either above or below, depending upon who your neighbor is, who's listening. Time of day. Yeah.
Spender, did you have something?
I was going to just mention what you did, Mr. Rees, time of day too, because as I know with generators, especially for data centers or battery storage, they kick on at different times of the day. So the noise might not be there at certain times. They might kick on and charge at nighttime when people are at home or so it varies by.
Ms. Cobb, did you have anything else you needed from us?
I don't think so. I think we've clarified so that I can provide you with a new change order.
Okay. And there was nothing else in the presentation? We're done with, you've provided all that you had planned to provide?
Yes. Additional discussion? Anything else you'd like to discuss?
I think that's, I think we've done due diligence on that unless someone really has something in particular they would like to address. But I believe we had Mr. Parker, apologies, Mr. Parker head out, and at this point I think we'd probably be ready for entertaining a motion, but I probably should wait for Mr. Parker to return. Ms. Lackey, would it matter, since we called to order first, would we have to adjourn last, or would it matter? Since we called to order first, would we have to adjourn last, or could we move to adjourn?
The Board of Supervisors could adjourn. Oh, well,
Oh.
here we go.
Well, let's moot. Mr. Parker, yes.
Go on earlier. All right. Sorry, we at adjournment? All right. Oh, there we go. So at this point, we'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn tonight's January 24th Planning Commission meeting, and we will reconvene February 14th for our special Valentine's Day Planning Commission meeting at 7 o'clock in the boardroom.
I move we adjourn the planning commission.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Sorry, sir.
Board of Supervisors, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to adjourn our meeting until Tuesday, February 7th, 6:30 here in the boardroom.
All right, motion properly seconded. We have any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Chair votes aye, motion carries. We are adjourned.
Thank you all.
Trying to get you the meeting.